My name is Scarlett, and at 34 I thought I had finally built the perfect life. My $2 million home in Pasadena Hills was the crown jewel of 15 years grinding in real estate. My three older brothers, David, Marcus, and Trevor, always seemed so proud of my success, and my parents would brag to their friends about their daughter who made it big in California. But sometimes the people closest to you are the ones planning your downfall. Everything changed after my knee replacement surgery following a cycling accident. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you won't believe what my own family tried to do while I was lying helpless in that hospital bed. Growing up in a working-class family in Toledo, Ohio, I was always the ambitious one. Dad worked as a mechanic at Ford. Mom taught third grade at Lincoln Elementary. My three brothers were 8 to 12 years older than me, so I often felt like I had four parents instead of two. David was 42 now and had been struggling since his construction company went bankrupt 3 years ago. Marcus, 38, was drowning in debt after a messy divorce that left him paying hefty alimony and child support. Trevor, the youngest of my brothers at 36, worked at a warehouse making barely enough to cover his rent in a studio apartment. When I turned 19, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and moved to California with $800 and a dream. I started as a receptionist at a real estate office in Burbank, answering phones and filing paperwork for $12 an hour. But I watched, I listened, and I learned. Within 6 months, I was studying for my real estate license. Within 2 years, I was closing deals. Within 5 years, I was one of the top agents in the San Fernando Valley. At 30, I bought my dream house. 4,200 square feet of Mediterranean-style perfection in Pasadena Hills. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a pool with a waterfall feature, a 3-car garage, and a view of the San Gabriel Mountains that took my breath away every morning. The monthly mortgage was steep, but I was earning it. I was living the American dream that my parents had worked their whole lives to give their children a shot at. Despite my success, family always came first. I sent my parents $1,000 every month to help with their expenses. When Marcus's ex-wife demanded increased child support, I helped him pay his legal fees. When David's business failed, I covered his mortgage for 6 months until he could figure things out. When Trevor's car broke down, I bought him a used Honda Civic. I never thought twice about it. Family takes care of family, right? That Sunday morning in Griffith Park changed everything. I was 23 miles into my usual 30-mile route when a jogger with headphones on stepped directly into my path. I swerved hard to avoid him, lost control, and went down hard on a jagged rock formation. The pain in my left knee was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The paramedics said I was lucky. It could have been my head instead of my kneecap. At Cedars-Sinai, Dr. Rodriguez explained that I had shattered my patella completely. The x-rays looked like someone had dropped a dinner plate on concrete. A total knee replacement was the only option if I ever wanted to walk normally again. The surgery would take 4 to 5 hours, followed by 6 to 8 weeks of recovery. I would need help with everything: cooking, cleaning, getting dressed, even basic hygiene. For someone who had been fiercely independent since I was 19, the prospect was terrifying. The morning of surgery, my entire family flew in from Ohio. Mom and Dad looked older than I remembered, worry lines etched deeper around their eyes as they sat in the waiting room. David paced constantly, checking his phone every few minutes. Marcus brought flowers and a card signed by his kids. Trevor seemed unusually quiet, but I attributed it to concern for his little sister. The anesthesiologist explained that I would be heavily sedated for the first few days to manage the pain. What he didn't mention was how the combination of opioid painkillers and general grogginess would leave me drifting in and out of consciousness for hours at a time. I would wake up for 20 or 30 minutes, barely able to focus, then sink back into medicated oblivion. Dr. Rodriguez said the surgery went perfectly. The artificial joint was in place, but my body needed time to accept it. Physical therapy wouldn't start for another week, and even then progress would be slow. I couldn't put any weight on my left leg for at least 3 weeks. A wheelchair and bedpan became my reality. My family took turns staying with me around the clock. During my brief periods of wakefulness, they seemed attentive and caring. David would adjust my pillows and ask if I needed anything. Marcus brought me ice chips and helped me sip water through a straw. Trevor read me articles from real estate magazines, though I could barely follow the words. But something felt off. When they thought I was sleeping, their conversations would shift. David asked a lot of questions about my finances. How much was the house worth now? Did I have a will? What about power of attorney documents? Marcus seemed particularly interested in where I kept important papers. Did I have a safe? Was everything in my home office? Trevor kept bringing up long-term care options. What if recovery took longer than expected? What if I needed help for months instead of weeks? During my second week of recovery, I started noticing the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I stirred. The way they would cluster together in the corner of the room, speaking in hushed tones. The nervous glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. My pain medication was being adjusted, and I was having longer periods of clarity. With that clarity came a growing sense of unease. Dr. Rodriguez delivered news that made my stomach sink. My recovery was progressing slower than hoped. The inflammation around the joint was more severe than expected, and my range of motion was limited. Instead of 6 to 8 weeks, I was looking at 3 to 4 months before I could walk normally again. Maybe longer. The news hit my family differently than I expected. Instead of disappointment or sympathy, I caught something else in their expressions. Something that looked almost like relief. That night, as I lay in my hospital bed, fighting waves of nausea from the pain medication, I heard my mother whisper to my father in the hallway outside my room. Her words were barely audible, but they chilled me to the bone. She said something about difficult decisions and doing what was best for everyone involved. When I asked her about it the next morning, she just smiled and said, I must have been dreaming. But I knew I hadn't been dreaming. Something was happening, something that involved me but was being planned without me. My own family was plotting something while I lay helpless and dependent on their care. The realization made me feel sicker than any amount of surgical pain ever could. On my 12th night in the hospital, chronic pain jolted me awake at 2 a.m. The nurse had given me my scheduled dose of medication an hour earlier, but the throbbing in my knee felt like someone was driving nails into the joint. I reached for the call button, then stopped. Voices were coming from the family lounge down the hall. My parents and all 3 of my brothers were having what sounded like an intense discussion. I should have called for the nurse. I should have tried to go back to sleep. Instead, I quietly maneuvered my wheelchair to the doorway and positioned myself where I could hear every word. What I heard next destroyed everything I thought I knew about the people who were supposed to love me most. David was speaking in the confident tone he used when he was trying to convince someone of something. Look, we all know Scarlett won't be the same after this. The doctor said there could be complications, maybe even permanent disability. She's been independent her whole life, but now she can't even go to the bathroom by herself. How is she going to manage a house that size? Marcus jumped in immediately. She can't handle a property that big anymore. It's irresponsible to let her struggle alone. Plus, the maintenance costs are enormous. Property taxes alone are over $20,000 a year. She's been supporting all of us for years anyway. It's time we took care of her for once. Trevor, who I had always considered the gentlest of my brothers, added his voice to the conspiracy. The house is too much responsibility. She'll be much happier somewhere with professional care available 24 hours a day. We'd be doing her a favor. My mother's voice was hesitant, uncertain. But it's her house. She worked so hard for it. She loves that place. How can we just take it away from her? The question gave me a brief flash of hope that someone in my family still had a conscience. That hope died when my father responded. Sometimes we have to make tough decisions for people we love, Helen. Scarlett isn't thinking clearly right now. She's on heavy medications, she's in pain, and she can't see the big picture. We can see what she needs better than she can. David took control of the conversation again. I already talked to a lawyer named Johnson. He specializes in cases where family members need to step in to protect someone who can't protect themselves anymore. We can get guardianship and power of attorney. Once we have legal control, we can sell the house and make sure the money is used for her care. The casual way he discussed stealing my life made my blood run cold. Marcus chimed in with details that proved this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment conversation. I already talked to a real estate agent in her neighborhood. Houses are selling fast in that area. We could easily get $2.2 million, maybe even $2.3 if we stage it right. Trevor added his own research to the pile of betrayal. I looked into several long-term care facilities. There's a place called Golden Years Manor about 30 minutes from here. It's really nice, and it only costs $4,500 a month. She'd have her own room, professional nursing staff activities, everything she needs. My father started talking numbers like I was a commodity to be managed, rather than a human being with rights and feelings. If we sell for $2.2 million and subtract realtor fees and closing costs, we're looking at about $2 million net. Take out $200,000 for her care, and we can divide the rest among the 4 of us kids, and me and your mother. That's about $300,000 each. The greed in his voice was unmistakable. My mother raised one more weak objection. Are we sure this is legal? What if she fights us? My father dismissed her concerns immediately. She can't fight us if she doesn't have legal capacity. Johnson says, as long as we can show she's not mentally competent to make her own decisions, the court will approve everything. David wrapped up the discussion with the kind of cold calculation that made me want to vomit. She always said family comes first. Well, now family is taking care of business. We've all sacrificed enough for her success. It's time for some of that success to come back to the people who supported her. I sat in that wheelchair in the darkness, listening to my entire family plan to steal my life away from me. The physical pain in my knee was nothing compared to the agony of realizing that the people I loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than a source of money to be exploited. They weren't concerned about my care or my happiness. They were concerned about getting their hands on my assets while I was too weak to stop them. The worst part was how reasonable they made it sound. How they convinced themselves they were doing me a favor by taking everything I had worked for and locking me away in some care facility. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I actually wondered if I was having some kind of medication-induced hallucination. But their voices were too clear, their planning too detailed, their greed too obvious for any of it to be a dream. I wheeled myself back to my room as quietly as possible and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling. By the time the sun came up, I had made 2 decisions. First, I was going to pretend I had heard nothing and continue to act like the helpless victim they believed me to be. Second, I was going to gather evidence and make them pay for every single word they had spoken in that lounge. The next morning I began the most difficult performance of my life. When David brought me breakfast and asked how I was feeling, I smiled weakly and told him how grateful I was to have such caring family members. When Marcus helped me with physical therapy exercises, I thanked him for being so patient with my slow progress. When Trevor read me get-well cards from friends, I told him how much his support meant to me. But while I was playing the role of the grateful invalid during the day, I was secretly gathering intelligence about their scheme. Every time they left my room for coffee or fresh air, I was making mental notes about their conversations. David had apparently met with the lawyer Johnson twice already. They had discussed the specific legal steps required to have me declared mentally incompetent due to my medication and physical condition. Marcus had taken it upon himself to become an expert on my financial situation. During one of his visits, I pretended to doze off while he was using his phone. I cracked my eyes open just enough to see him photographing documents from my purse, including credit card statements and bank information. The violation of my privacy was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. Trevor had been assigned the task of researching my medical condition and prognosis. He had somehow obtained copies of my medical records and was in contact with Dr. Rodriguez's office asking detailed questions about my long-term mobility prospects. The fact that he was using his concern for my health as a weapon against me made his betrayal particularly cruel. My parents were handling the logistics of liquidating my life. Mom had visited 3 different long-term care facilities and was comparing costs and services. Dad had contacted my bank about procedures for transferring assets when someone became incapacitated. They were covering all the bases, making sure their theft would be legal and binding. But they had made one crucial mistake. They underestimated me. Despite the pain medication and physical limitations, my mind was sharp enough to understand what they were doing and smart enough to start building my own case. I managed to get a message to my personal attorney, Patricia Williams, through a nurse I trusted. I told Patricia I needed to see her urgently, but couldn't explain why over the phone. Patricia visited me the following evening, posing as a friend bringing flowers. In the 15 minutes we had alone while my family was getting dinner, I explained the entire situation. Patricia was shocked but not entirely surprised. She said family financial abuse was more common than most people realized, especially when significant assets were involved. She immediately began working on my behalf. Patricia discovered that Johnson, the lawyer my brothers had contacted, had been disciplined by the state bar twice for ethical violations. His specialty seemed to be helping family members gain control over elderly or disabled relatives' assets. She also learned that my brothers had already opened a joint bank account supposedly for my care, but with only their names on it. Meanwhile, I started recording conversations whenever possible. My smartphone was always within reach, and I became expert at starting a voice recording without anyone noticing. Over the course of a week, I captured dozens of incriminating conversations. My family had become so confident in their plan that they were discussing details, openly assuming I was too medicated to understand or remember anything. The most damning recording came when I pretended to be asleep during one of their evening strategy sessions. David was explaining to Marcus how they would present me as mentally incompetent. They would tell the court that the pain medication had affected my cognitive abilities and that I was making irrational decisions. They had already prepared examples of supposedly erratic behavior to present as evidence. Marcus added that they had documentation showing I was financially irresponsible because I had been giving them money for years. They would argue that my generosity was actually evidence of poor judgment and that I needed protection from myself. The cruel irony of using my love for them as proof that I was incompetent was breathtaking in its cynicism. Trevor revealed that he had gambling debts totaling $85,000. He owed money to people who had made it clear that non-payment would result in broken bones or worse. His share of my house sale would solve his problems and probably save his life. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't just about greed. For Trevor, it was about survival. That didn't make the betrayal any less painful, but it helped explain the desperation I had sensed in him. Marcus confessed that his ex-wife was threatening to take him back to court for increased child support. She had hired a new lawyer who was demanding financial records going back 5 years. If Marcus couldn't come up with a substantial lump sum to negotiate a settlement, he was facing possible jail time for contempt of court. My house was his get-out-of-jail-free card. Literally. Even David, who I had thought was the ringleader, had his own financial pressures. His construction company hadn't just failed, it had left him personally liable for over $200,000 in debt. Creditors were threatening to seize his own home, and bankruptcy was looking like his only option. Unless he could access my assets to pay his obligations. By the end of my 3rd week in the hospital, I had a complete picture of their conspiracy. I also had hours of recorded evidence photographs Patricia had taken of their fake legal documents and a detailed timeline of their activities. Most importantly, I had a plan for revenge that would teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. The 4th week of my hospital stay brought the final phase of their scheme into motion. David arrived on Monday morning with a briefcase full of legal documents. He explained that they were just precautionary measures to protect my interests while I recovered. The papers included power of attorney forms, asset transfer agreements, and guardianship petitions. He used his most caring brotherly voice as he spread the documents across my bed table. "Scarlett, we know this is overwhelming, but we need to make sure you're protected if something happens. These papers just give us the legal authority to handle your finances and medical decisions while you get better. It's temporary, just until you're back on your feet." The papers looked official and legitimate, complete with legal letterhead and notary seals. But Patricia had already explained to me how to identify the fraudulent elements. The power of attorney was unnecessarily broad, giving them control over assets far beyond what any reasonable protection would require. The guardianship petition included false statements about my mental capacity and prognosis. I played my role perfectly. With a shaking hand, I signed each document where David indicated thanking him repeatedly for taking such good care of me. What David didn't realize was that Patricia had provided me with substitute signature pages that made the documents legally worthless. While he thought he was getting my authorization to steal my life, I was actually signing blank pieces of paper. Marcus arrived that afternoon with more paperwork. This batch included a preliminary listing agreement with a real estate agent and authorization for them to clean out my house and put my belongings in storage. He explained that they were just getting everything ready in case I needed to move to a care facility temporarily. The speed with which they were moving proved they had no intention of waiting to see how my recovery progressed. Trevor brought the final insult brochures and admission paperwork for Golden Years Manor. He had already scheduled a tour and put down a deposit to hold a room. The facility looked nice in the glossy brochures, but it was essentially a prison where they could warehouse me while they spent my money. The monthly cost was $4,500, which would eat up my assets in less than 40 years, even if they only stole half of what I owned. That evening I was alone in my room when my entire family gathered for what they clearly thought was a celebration. They had brought a bottle of champagne and plastic cups, thinking I was too sedated to notice or remember. David made a toast to family taking care of family. Marcus raised his cup to new beginnings for everyone. Trevor thanked me for being so understanding about the difficult decisions they had to make. My mother was the only one who seemed uncomfortable with the festivities. She kept looking at me with an expression that might have been guilt or regret. When she thought no one was listening, she whispered to my father that maybe they were moving too fast. Maybe I would recover better than the doctors expected. Maybe they should wait and see. My father shut down her concerns immediately. "Helen, we've been over this. The doctor said her recovery could take months or even years. We can't put our own lives on hold indefinitely. This is what's best for everyone, including Scarlett. She'll be happier not having to worry about bills and maintenance and all the responsibilities that come with a big house." David added his own justification for their theft. "She's been the golden child for too long anyway. Everything always came easy for her. College, career, that house, all of it. The rest of us have been struggling while she lived like a queen. Now it's time for the family to share in some of that success." Marcus couldn't resist adding his own resentment to the pile. "Do you know what it's like watching your little sister buy a $2 million house while you're getting evicted from a studio apartment? She never once offered to help us buy homes of our own. Just handed out charity money like we were her pet projects. This levels the playing field." Trevor was more direct about his motivations. "I need this money and I need it now. I'm sorry she's hurt, but I didn't break her leg. This is just unfortunate timing that happens to work out for all of us. She'll be fine in that care place. Better than fine. She'll have people waiting on her hand and foot." As I listened to them justify stealing everything I had worked for, I realized that their betrayal went much deeper than I had initially understood. They didn't just want my money. They resented my success and wanted to punish me for achieving things they couldn't achieve themselves. This wasn't about providing for my care. This was about bringing me down to their level. The final piece of evidence I needed came when Marcus pulled out his phone and started showing pictures of houses he was planning to buy with his share of the proceeds. David discussed paying off his debts and maybe starting a new business. Trevor talked about taking a vacation to Las Vegas once his gambling debts were settled. None of them mentioned my ongoing care or well-being beyond the bare minimum required to keep me warehoused and sedated. They had planned my entire future without consulting me, and that future looked like a slow death in a care facility while they lived off the fruits of my labor. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. These weren't desperate people making a tragic mistake. These were predators who had identified an opportunity and were taking full advantage of someone they perceived as helpless. But I wasn't helpless. I was angry and I was armed with evidence of their conspiracy. Tomorrow they were going to learn that stealing from Scarlett Williams was the biggest mistake of their lives. The next morning brought the beginning of the end for my family's criminal conspiracy. I had spent the previous evening coordinating with Patricia Williams to set the legal wheels in motion. She had already contacted the district attorney's office about the fraud and filed papers to freeze any accounts my brothers had opened using my information. At 9 a.m., I did something that shocked everyone in my hospital room. I stood up. Not with assistance, not with a walker, but under my own power, using only a single crutch for balance. The look of terror on David's face was worth every moment of pain I had endured over the past month. My recovery had actually progressed much faster than anyone expected, including my doctors. I had been doing physical therapy exercises in secret during the night shifts, pushing my body harder than the official therapy sessions allowed. The pain was excruciating, but my rage had provided motivation that no medical protocol could match. David was the first to find his voice. "Scarlett, you shouldn't be standing yet. The doctor said at least another month before you could bear weight on that leg. You could re-injure yourself. Sit back down before you fall." I looked him directly in the eyes and smiled. "Funny thing about doctors, David. I got a second opinion yesterday from an orthopedic specialist Patricia Williams recommended. Turns out I'm healing much faster than Dr. Rodriguez initially predicted. Amazing what determination and physical therapy can accomplish when you have something important to fight for." Marcus tried to maintain the caring brother act. "That's wonderful news, but you still need to be careful. We've made all these arrangements to help you during your recovery. There's no need to rush things." That's when I dropped the first bomb. "I know about all the arrangements you've made, Marcus. Every single one of them. I know about the fake guardianship papers, the real estate agent, the nursing home deposit, and the bank account you opened to steal my money." The silence that followed was deafening. Trevor tried to deny everything, but his voice came out as a whisper. "We don't know what you're talking about. We've only been trying to help you. You must be confused from all the medication." I pulled out my smartphone and held it up so they could see the screen. "Let me refresh your memory." Then I played back the recording of their conversation from 3 nights earlier, the one where they discussed dividing up $2 million after selling my house and locking me away. The sound of their own voices plotting my destruction hit them like physical blows. David went pale and sank into a chair. Marcus started stammering excuses that made no sense. Trevor just stared at the floor. My parents looked like they wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. But I wasn't finished. I also know that David has been meeting with a disbarred lawyer named Johnson who specializes in helping families steal from disabled relatives. I know that Marcus has been photographing my financial documents and bank statements. I know that Trevor owes $85,000 to loan sharks and needs his share of my house to avoid getting his legs broken. The accuracy of my information left them speechless. Then I delivered the knockout punch. And I know all of this because I've been recording every conversation you've had for the past 2 weeks. I have hours of audio evidence of you planning to commit fraud, elder abuse, and theft. All of it is already in the hands of my attorney and the district attorney's office. David made one last desperate attempt to control the situation. "You're not thinking clearly. The stress and medication are making you paranoid. We're your family. We would never hurt you. Everything we've done has been to protect you." That's when Patricia Williams walked into the room, followed by 2 detectives from the LAPD Financial Crimes Unit. Patricia introduced herself as my attorney and explained that she had been investigating their activities for over a week. Detective Rodriguez, no relation to my surgeon, read David his rights and placed him under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted financial elder abuse. Marcus tried to run, which was both pathetic and pointless in a hospital room with only one exit. Detective Martinez tackled him gently but firmly and placed him in handcuffs. Trevor didn't resist. He just sat there crying and repeating, "I'm sorry," over and over again. The charges were serious and numerous. David faced conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft of property over $50,000, and financial elder abuse. Marcus was charged with identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Trevor was charged as an accessory to fraud, but might avoid jail time if he cooperated with prosecutors. But the legal consequences were just the beginning. Patricia had also filed civil lawsuits against all 3 of my brothers seeking damages for emotional distress attorney fees and punitive damages. The civil cases would proceed regardless of the criminal outcomes, and I intended to pursue them to the fullest extent possible. My parents begged me not to press charges against their sons. They claimed they had been reluctantly going along with a plan they didn't really understand. But I had recordings of them researching nursing homes and discussing how to divide up my assets. They were willing participants in the conspiracy, even if they weren't the architects. I looked at my mother and father, these people who had raised me and whom I had loved unconditionally, and told them something I never thought I would say. You are not welcome in my house anymore. You are not welcome in my life. You chose money over your daughter, and now you can live with that choice. The devastation on their faces was complete. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. My father tried to approach me, but Patricia stepped between us and firmly told him to stay back. The family that had raised me was gone, destroyed by their own greed and betrayal. Over the following weeks, the legal system moved with surprising efficiency. David was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. He was also ordered to pay $50,000 in restitution to cover my legal fees and emotional damages. Marcus received 12 months in jail and 5 years probation, plus $30,000 in restitution. Trevor got 200 hours of community service and 2 years probation because he had cooperated fully with the investigation. The civil lawsuits resulted in additional financial penalties. David lost his house when he couldn't make payments while dealing with legal fees. Marcus had to declare bankruptcy, which actually protected him from some of my claims, but destroyed his credit permanently. Trevor kept his job, but would be paying me $100 a month for the next 10 years. My parents were not criminally charged, but I obtained restraining orders preventing them from contacting me or coming near my property. They flew back to Ohio in shame, their relationship with their only daughter destroyed forever by their participation in their son's scheme. The fake lawyer Johnson lost his license permanently and faced his own criminal charges. The real estate agent who had conspired with Marcus was fined by the state licensing board and nearly lost her own license. Everyone who had participated in the plot to steal my life faced serious consequences. But the most satisfying result was watching my brothers realize that their get-rich-quick scheme had actually made their financial situations worse than before. David went from being broke to being broke and having a criminal record. Marcus went from struggling with debt to struggling with debt as a convicted felon. Trevor went from owing money to loan sharks to owing money to loan sharks, plus owing me restitution. Their plan to solve their financial problems by stealing from me had accomplished the exact opposite. Instead of gaining hundreds of thousands of dollars each, they had lost everything and gained criminal records that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The irony was so perfect, it almost made up for the pain they had caused me. The months following my family's arrest were the hardest of my life, but also the most transformative. The physical recovery from my surgery was actually the easy part. Learning to walk normally again, regaining my strength, getting back to work, all of that was straightforward compared to the emotional healing I needed to do. The betrayal had cut deeper than the surgeon's knife. These weren't strangers who had tried to hurt me. These weren't business rivals or opportunistic criminals. These were the people who had taught me to ride a bike, who had celebrated my graduation, who had hugged me when I bought my first house. The fact that they could plan my destruction so casually and completely had shattered something fundamental in my ability to trust. For the first 2 months after the criminal trials ended, I barely left my house. The place that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a monument to naivety. Every room reminded me of family gatherings where I had felt loved and supported, not knowing that those same family members were calculating my net worth and planning how to divide it among themselves. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Sarah Martinez, who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. She helped me understand that what my family had done to me was more common than most people realized. Adult children, stealing from elderly parents, siblings, exploiting disabled relatives, families conspiring to gain control of successful members' assets. The stories she shared made me realize I wasn't alone in this particular kind of betrayal. Dr. Martinez helped me work through the complex emotions I was feeling. The grief for the family relationships that were now permanently destroyed. The anger at being treated like a commodity rather than a human being. The fear that I would never be able to trust anyone completely again. the guilt over wondering if my success had somehow caused their resentment and greed. Slowly I began to rebuild my life on my own terms. I returned to work 4 months after the surgery, initially on a limited basis, but gradually resuming full-time activities. My clients had been incredibly supportive during my recovery, and several had sent flowers and cards when news of the criminal charges became public. The real estate community in Los Angeles can be cutthroat, but they also protect their own when someone is victimized. Within 6 months, I had decided to make a major career change. Instead of working for a large real estate firm where I was just another agent, I started my own company. Scarlett Williams Realty opened with 3 agents and a focus on helping single women achieve home ownership. I wanted to use my experience and success to help other women build the kind of financial independence that could protect them from the predators in their own lives. The business grew rapidly. Within 2 years, I had 15 agents working for me and had helped over 200 women buy their first homes. Many of my clients were divorcing wives who needed to establish new lives after discovering their husbands' betrayals. Others were young professionals who wanted to build wealth instead of just paying rent. All of them understood the importance of financial independence in ways that my family never had. I also became an advocate for victims of family financial abuse. I testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger laws protecting disabled and elderly people from exploitation by relatives. I wrote articles for real estate publications about recognizing the warning signs of financial abuse and protecting assets from family predators. The advocacy work led to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities. I helped other attorneys identify cases of family financial fraud and testified as an expert witness in several high-profile cases. The pain my brothers had caused me became the foundation for helping other people avoid similar victimization. 2 years after the criminal trials, Trevor reached out to me through Patricia Williams. He had completed his community service and was halfway through his probation period. More importantly, he had gotten help for his gambling addiction and was working with a therapist to address the underlying issues that had led to his participation in the conspiracy. His letter was heartfelt and detailed. He acknowledged that what they had done was inexcusable and that my forgiveness was neither expected nor required. He explained how the gambling addiction had consumed his judgment and made him desperate enough to betray the sister who had always been there for him. He described the therapy and 12-step program that had helped him understand the magnitude of his betrayal. Most importantly, Trevor didn't ask for anything. He didn't want money, didn't want to be welcomed back into my life, didn't want me to drop the restitution payments. He just wanted me to know that he understood what he had done and was committed to becoming someone worthy of eventual forgiveness, even if that forgiveness never came. After extensive discussion with doctors, Martinez and I agreed to meet with Trevor for one supervised conversation. We met at Patricia's office with both our attorneys present. Trevor looked older and thinner than I remembered, but also somehow more genuine than he had in years. The desperation and shifty-eyed anxiety I remembered from the hospital were gone. He told me about losing his job when the criminal charges became public, then finding work at a nonprofit organization that helped people with gambling addictions. He was making less money than before, but he was also debt-free for the first time in 10 years, thanks to the bankruptcy that followed his criminal conviction. He was attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week and had a sponsor who helped him work through the steps of recovery. Most importantly, Trevor had learned to see his addiction as an explanation for his behavior, but not an excuse for it. He understood that millions of people struggled with gambling problems without betraying their families. He knew that his desperation didn't justify his participation in the conspiracy to steal my life. I told him that forgiveness would be a long process, and that rebuilding trust might be impossible. But I also acknowledged that he was the only member of my family who had shown genuine remorse and taken concrete steps to address his problems. David and Marcus had both blamed their actions on me, claiming that my success had somehow forced them to commit crimes. My parents continued to insist they had been trying to help me. Trevor was different. He owned his mistakes completely and was working to become a better person without expecting any reward for his efforts. That didn't erase what he had done, but it created the possibility that someday we might have some kind of relationship again. I also met someone during my recovery who helped me learn to trust again. James Patterson was an architect who attended one of my financial literacy workshops for recently divorced professionals. He was 41, had gone through his own devastating divorce when his ex-wife had an affair with his business partner, and understood the complexity of rebuilding your life after betrayal by people you trusted. James and I started as friends, bonding over our shared experiences with family and financial trauma. He had lost his architecture firm in the divorce settlement and was rebuilding his career one small project at a time. I was rebuilding my ability to trust people with my heart and my assets. We understood each other's caution and respected each other's boundaries. Our relationship developed slowly over 18 months. James never asked about my money or my house. He never suggested moving in together or combining finances. He never tried to rush me into commitments I wasn't ready to make. He understood that my independence wasn't selfishness, but self-protection, and he supported my need to maintain control over my own life. 3 years after my surgery, James and I were engaged. Not because I needed someone to take care of me, but because I had found someone who respected my strength and independence. Someone who wanted to build a life with me, rather than live off my success. Someone who understood that love meant supporting each other's goals, rather than exploiting each other's vulnerabilities. My house, the same house my brothers had tried to steal, became the site of our small wedding ceremony. 40 people attended, mostly friends from work and clients who had become close personal relationships. None of my family members were invited. Trevor sent a card wishing me happiness, which was more acknowledgement than I received from David, Marcus, or my parents. The wedding was perfect in ways I hadn't expected. Instead of being surrounded by people who saw me as a source of financial support, I was surrounded by people who valued me for my friendship, my professional expertise, and my personal character. Instead of worrying about protecting my assets from predatory family members, I was celebrating with someone who had signed a prenuptial agreement without being asked and who contributed equally to our shared expenses. Looking back on the worst period of my life, I realized that my family's betrayal had actually given me an unexpected gift. It had forced me to examine all of my relationships and eliminate the ones based on financial dependency rather than genuine affection. It had taught me the difference between people who loved me and people who loved what I could do for them. The experience had also shown me that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. When my family plotted to steal everything I had worked for, I fought back and won. When they tried to have me declared incompetent and helpless, I proved them wrong in the most decisive way possible. When they attempted to destroy my independence, I used their attack as motivation to become even more successful. My brothers had thought they were targeting a vulnerable victim who wouldn't be able to resist their scheme. Instead, they had picked a fight with someone who had spent 15 years building a real estate empire through determination, intelligence, and strategic thinking. They brought their small-time criminal conspiracy to a fight with someone who had the resources, connections, and expertise to destroy them completely. The final irony was that their plan to solve their financial problems had accomplished exactly the opposite. David's financial situation was worse after his prison sentence than it had been before. Marcus's bankruptcy and criminal record had made him essentially unemployable in any well-paying job. Trevor was better off than before, but only because he had been forced to address his gambling addiction and the underlying problems that had created his debts. If they had simply asked me for help with their financial problems, I probably would have given them significant assistance without expecting anything in return. David could have gotten a loan to pay his debts. Marcus could have gotten help with his legal fees. Trevor could have gotten treatment for his gambling addiction before it destroyed his life. Instead, they chose to try to steal everything I had, and they lost what little they still possessed. But the most important lesson I learned was about the nature of family itself. Family isn't just about shared DNA or childhood memories. Real family consists of people who genuinely want what's best for you and what's best from you. Real family supports your success instead of resenting it. Real family protects you when you're vulnerable, instead of exploiting your weakness. I found my real family among friends, clients, colleagues, and eventually James. These were people who celebrated my achievements without expecting to profit from them. People who offered help during my recovery without strings attached. People who valued my happiness more than my bank account. Today, 5 years after my surgery, I can honestly say that my life is better than it was before my family's betrayal. My marriage is built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. My business is thriving and helping other women achieve financial independence. My advocacy work is making a real difference in protecting vulnerable people from family financial abuse. I still think about my parents and brothers sometimes, usually when I'm helping a client who is dealing with similar family dynamics. I don't hate them anymore, which Dr. Martinez says is a sign of healthy healing. But I don't miss them either. The people they turned out to be were not the people I thought I had grown up loving. Sometimes people ask me if I regret cutting my family out of my life so completely. The answer is always no. They made their choice when they decided to steal my house and lock me away in a nursing home. I made my choice when I decided to fight back and protect myself. They chose money over family. I chose self-respect over enabling their criminal behavior. The house they tried to steal is still my sanctuary, but now it's also a symbol of victory over people who underestimated my strength. Every morning when I look out at the San Gabriel Mountains from my bedroom window, I remember that I fought for this view and won. Every evening when James and I sit by the pool, they wanted to sell. I'm grateful for the independence they tried to take away from me. My knee, the injury that started this whole nightmare, healed perfectly. I can walk, run, dance, and even ride my bike again. The physical recovery was complete within 6 months. The emotional recovery took longer, but it was also more thorough than I expected. I didn't just heal from their betrayal, I became stronger because of it. Family isn't about blood. It's about people who stand by you when you're vulnerable, instead of people who see vulnerability as an opportunity to exploit you. It's about people who celebrate your success instead of people who resent your achievements. It's about people who want to add to your life instead of people who want to subtract from your assets. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. But when you stand up for yourself, when you refuse to be a victim, you don't just save yourself. You show others that they don't have to be victims either. My family thought they could steal my house, but what they really tried to steal was my dignity, my independence, and my future. I'm grateful they failed because in fighting for what was mine, I discovered who I really was. And that person is worth so much more than any house could ever be. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? How did you find the strength to protect yourself when the people closest to you became your biggest threat? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and building the life you deserve, and please share this with anyone who might be facing similar challenges with their own family. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your strength is always greater than other people's greed. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that teach us who we really are, and sometimes the people we lose weren't worth keeping anyway. Stay strong, stay independent, and never let anyone convince you that you're too weak to fight for what's yours.